Just a bit of background. I've come from telecoms, and I've worked in telecoms for the last 15 years. What drew me to this industry was an awful lot of parallels between that sector in the late 90s, early 2000s, and the energy market today. And I think as we go through the slides, it may become clearer. Pilgrim Burt, our founder, has spoken to you this morning, and I won't go over much of the same ground. I think just following on from Simon, it would be useful just to put us in context. I suppose we come to the same market, the consumer, but from the other side. So our heritage is from online, and we are already an open platform looking to drive energy efficiency in the home by giving customers access any way they are. I think from us, the internet is important for two reasons. One is the data capability it gives you. Now, for consumers, that's important because you can personalize. You know a lot about them, and you can personalize and tailor services. But also, you can access them where they are. And one of the learnings that we have from the way that people use the service is you need to be where the customer is. Absolutely in the home, I quite agree, but also online. And that means being on the homepage they use. Witness the Google gadget. That also means being on the mobile phone, so the smartphone they use. If you look at the way that customers use our service, the use rate is about 25 visits a month. Now of that, about 5 go to the dedicated website. The rest is access on the move and access through the other means of contact around the web that we have. So one of the key benefits to us of being open and online is that we need to be where the customer is, because this is about evolving customer behavior rather than expecting a revolution overnight. What do? We have smart energy monitoring, which again is internet-based, based around a small internet bridge, or what we call a hub in the home. It uses Zigbee. We see this both as a smart meter bridge, so an infill for utilities and consumers before the roll of smart meters, but also as complementary once those meters are out. If you look at the architecture of smart meters, you've got to-be-defined GPRS backhaul, which is primarily devoted to billing and rating. Now, depending on the architecture, whether it's a daisy chain, you may have some constraints about the level of data you put down that pipe and certainly send back. We think a fixed broadband second entry into the home becomes the consumer benefit pack of the smart meter. It enables, one, communication that's uncluttered with the fiscal accuracy concerns of the utility, but two, much richer two-way communication for the customer. So we see the service working both before the smart meter, but also being complementary to it once it's rolled out in the customer's home. As Simon mentioned, heating controls, and that's something we also offer, using the same infrastructure, again using Zigbee wireless communication in the home, because it is the elephant in the room, and it's the big saving that customers can make. And I'll talk in a little more detail about what that service entails further on. Home appliance control we have using smart plugs up here, which can be used to measure, to monitor cost and consumption, but also to control remotely. You can turn off your TV if your kids are watching it from your bed at midnight. And the final area there is connected home. That's the heritage of the company, and a broader range of services around home automation. This is a slide you've seen earlier, but it's the market context, and it's useful just to run through again quickly. From the top right, I think everyone's aware of the macro context here. We've got aggressive targets for carbon reduction. There are security of supply concerns, all of which say the low-hanging fruit is energy efficiency in the home. How do we get there? From consumers, it's cost. And it's cost as a percent of disposable income that's the key concern. That's going up, and it's likely to increase and continue going up. We think the introduction of the annual statement for utilities later this year will be a real catalyst for more movement in the market between providers, because when people see what they've spent in the last year on electricity and gas, we think that will start to generate a lot more movement. And that's an opportunity for consumers, but also for players in that market to differentiate. Now, coming down to the retail side, on the right for the existing energy suppliers, it's really a commoditized business, and the focus is on customer loyalty and ARPU growth. The challenges here are around, if I'm asking customers to use less, how am I going to replace that revenue? And so what we look at is solutions where subscription-based services can start to offset some of the lost variable energy-derived revenues for those players. The other part that's important is smart meter expectations. And again, to echo Simon, smart meter rollouts are great for utilities, but there isn't a very obvious consumer benefit. What's in it for me? So the visibility that's gained is a limited upside to what is currently out there in the form of the in-home displays that Simon's spoken about. Finally, onto telecoms. Telecoms, because they're coming from a market which is saturated, but they have a gateway into the home. And looking at revenue prospects going forward, the connected home or the smart home is one area where there's real interest in this sector. And of that, energy looks like a ubiquitous service with a universal appeal. It doesn't have to be moving into energy retail. It could be offering energy monitoring and control services as layered service to drive ARPU growth, leveraging their in-home home gateway. So the market's going to change a lot. It reminds me a lot of the broadband market in 2002. There were about 180,000 broadband customers then. I mean, the number is many, many times greater than that now. And that moved very quickly through a couple of fundamental changes to the market. And that second bullet point shows you, I think, some similar dynamics happening now. New entrants will start to drive much greater emphasis on customer services and the need to differentiate. And we think driving home energy efficiency and giving customers the tools to do that is going to be one key way of doing it. The world is going to get more complex. From just getting a bill every quarter, in the world of distributed power generation with solar PV, with time of use tariff, for the consumer, it's a more complex environment, and there's an onus on the utility to respond and give them the tools to deal with that. For the consumer, I think it's mainly complexity aside good news, because it should mean increased choice and increasing motivation on the part of their suppliers to start giving them additional services to lock them in. So it's still a new market. The in-home displays have been out there now for a number of years and have done a very good job, I think, in starting to drive awareness, but we are still in the early stages. And one of the first challenges is just to get the basics right. You know, what is home energy management? If you ask a man in the street, my parents didn't understand what I was doing in broadband, they've got no idea what I'm doing now. It's still a challenge. And I think the first thing that we've done is to look at what is the service, who's it for, and what are the benefits messages for those segments. Second thing is obvious, make it affordable. No one's going to spend £100 on equipment in the home to make a saving on their energy bill. And the other point here is obvious again, make it simple. Because if it's difficult to install, I'm not going to install it and I'm not going to use it. The second step that we're looking at is then working with brands who have established customer bases and means of communication to get the product to market. And that means raising awareness. Again, if you look at broadband, nobody knew what broadband did 8 years ago, or why I should get it versus dial-up. And it was a BT campaign back in 2002-03, which had the cartoon characters from one of the computer games, that started to raise awareness that you can actually use the internet for entertainment. It wasn't just for email. And that's exactly the case with home energy management. We need people with big brands out there pushing the benefits to consumers. And to start with, those will be segments that are the early adopters. So displays and the online services will work for different segments of the market as the market evolves. But certainly for the online proposition, you're probably looking at a younger demographic, maybe time poor to begin with. But those guys know their customers well. And that's why our plan is to work as, yes, direct, but also on a white label basis with channel partners. And finally, in the mass market stage, the war of the gateways is correct. I think they'll ultimately, things like this internet bridge to get home energy monitoring should be integrated into home gateways, broadband routers, because it's lower cost and it can provide an upsell for router manufacturers. I think ultimately the hardware will be subsidized and the services bundled. Again, if you take the broadband market as a comparator, the real takeoff happened when two things happened. One, the activation fee, which was £40, was subsidised to zero by the telcos. And the second was when they gave away the broadband modem. With that, the barriers to cost to entry disappeared and the market shot up. I think the same is true here. If we can get some simple, low-cost devices to the point where big players can subsidise and then hang a business model off the back of it, be it loyalty or be it incremental revenue, that's when the market takes off. Final point is a given, and there is a problem right now with this interoperability, because you really want to see the same number on your smart meter as you're seeing in your in-home display and online, and that's an issue that is out there to be addressed. Just briefly on market segmentation, it's quite crude, but we're looking at the market in these three segments to begin with. Cost is probably the universal driver, and you can see some excerpts from the research we've done. The biggest group of customers are concerned about affordability, and it's that key metric energy bills as a percent of disposable income of the driver. And only 40% are satisfied they're on the best deal. The next group is the time-starved, environmentally conscious. Typically, a bit more money, but less time. This could be busy mums and dads who are both working, or it could be professionals. They're prepared to pay. You see up here, 70% would pay £2 a month to save £150 a year. It's as much for the fact of not wasting energy as saving money for this demographic. And the final one, the environmentally forward, are more the ambassadors and the thought leaders in this area. But it's important when looking at channels that you get your messaging correct for those audiences. Some very brief bullet points, because I want to move on to the applications we offer. Display, I think Simon's spot on. The display has got to be visually engaging. You've got to use colour, and you've got to use traffic light colour coding to make it work for customers. Otherwise, it's a wall of numbers, and that's true online as it is offline. The information should keep me aware and help me learn. It's got to be in pounds, kilowatts, have some meaning after a time, but it's money that's the key. And they want the information in context. Is this good or bad? You know, the benchmarks people want is not the national average. How am I doing against people like me? How am I doing against my performance for the last 4 Tuesdays? That's useful and actionable. Me against the national average is meaningless. So we've taken that feedback to create an online approach that is application-driven. This is not the interface, it's just a list of some of the applications we've got to show you how we're presenting it. Each one of these is functionally driven. You can click through for greater detail and click through for more detail again if you need it. But what we're trying to do is move through some generics. So, simple things, a budgeting tool. How much am I going to spend this month? Consumption, a graphical illustration of how much I'm using now. Where we have smart plugs, you can turn it off and on, and you can see what you're using. Targets and budgeting. How am I doing? And this shows you very simply how I'm tracking against the last 4 Thursdays. So this is my performance. If it's green, I'm doing well. If it's red, I'm doing badly. But within targets, we think, as I said, I think there are 3 main reference points. Yourself, people like you, i.e. the same number of people in the home and the same number of bedrooms, and then a bespoke group. It could be for a utility, it could be a peer group, or it could be a postcode. But those 3 benchmarks are key for engagement. It's the thing that keeps you coming back to the service and keeping you engaged. This area is a longer conversation, but looking at the information we get from the signature of electricity in the home, but also taking customer input to start breaking down where you are using the consumption. Because I think, again, to Simon's point, whole house consumption is great. Now what do I do? Where am I using that electricity? And that's where the data analytics of the internet can be very, very powerful. The other key messages I've touched on, we need to be where the customer is if we're to integrate energy efficiency into someone's daily routine. And that means if they've got a Google Home page, make sure you have a widget there. If they've got a smartphone, make sure you've got an application there. Make use of email and SMS, but don't overdo it or you'll turn them off. And the other thing I think is around managing complexity. We see a big opportunity with solar because for a customer, you really want one place to go online to see how much am I spending, electricity, gas, and how much am I generating. And then you want to overlay the generation against the consumption and say, what do I do about that? When the sun's shining and I'm being paid for it with the FITS tariff, you really want an alert to come and say, the sun's shining, turn your washing machine on. And when smart appliances come, you want that washing machine turning on to be automated. And that's real value for consumers because they don't have to think or do, it just happens for them. So I think finally, what we're about is giving the consumer the tools so they can make daily choices. Now some people may choose not to, and that comes on to the second point, which is with an online service, we should be doing the hard work for the customer. We should be letting you know on an exception basis what you need to know, when you need to know. If your consumption is trending significantly higher today than it has been for the last 4 weeks, you probably want to know about that, and you probably want some suggestions or thoughts about what it might be. And that's the core of the service. And the final point is work to get energy management into a customer's daily routine. In the home as part of it, online as part of it, and mobile will be probably the biggest interface going forward. I think finally the last point is as much a plea around interoperability as anything else, but for the consumer, you don't want to go to one device for your remote management of heating, another one in the home for your energy consumption, and something else online for your gas. Really, you want a simple dashboard where all those things are joined up with recommendations across the three of those. And that's it.